And welcome to another edition of Lectures with Sean. Today we're going to be going through how to give someone hair. You may know a family member who might need this. Unfortunately, it only works digitally. So until we have the technology to print it and attach it to their scalp, it's not really going to work too good. So the way we're going to start this off is I'm going to give you a file to start with. But if you have Maya 2015 and before on your computer, you can actually pick other things you want. So in your program files, Autodesk, Maya, presets, mocap, examples, there are these files here. And these are basically just like these little motion capture type things that someone did. And if I hit play, you'll see that we have these characters kind of walking around. Okay, so you just drag them into your scene and then you would have one. All right, so with this, we want to create a walking character. That way we can kind of test out the hair and see how it's moving around. With this specific one, we want to go with something for our first one that's a little bit less movement. Okay, so like this guy here, he has very little movement in him. I mean, he walks, he claps his hands, but he's definitely not walking as fast as this dude. Okay, that's how I walk down the hall, maybe even quicker. But this guy, he has a nice pace to him. Okay, and definitely not the sitting one, because eventually we're going to use this for clothing too, and the amount of crease that's happening right here could give us some trouble when we do our cloth. So I'm going to delete that guy and this guy. Let's see his bones. And then I'll have just this one. Okay, so this is what I'm going to give you to start, is this guy right here. So I'm going to go to my project window. I'm going to make a project. I'm going to call this Sarcona Dress Up. We're going to give him hair and clothing. This lecture will focus just on the clothing or the hair aspect. And I'll save this as startup dynamic dress up. And syncing. Wonderful. And then I'm just going to save it as my last name right here, so I don't ruin the one I gave you for the startup. Alright, so a couple things to consider. He is huge. You can see how small the grid is. He's a lot bigger. So if he's actually real life size, which I believe is what they've created him to be, if I go to my measuring tools and I click a point up here and click a point down there, you'll see he's 182 centimeters, which is about average height. So what we can do is we want to keep it at that, because then our simulation will be a bit more realistic looking, because it's at the correct scale. If we shrink it down, then we have to worry about other stuff. Now if we wanted to shrink him down, just so you can see it, there's actually a, that's a different one. Yes, that's in one of my other guys. There's a locator right here called Walk One Reference, and if I scale that down, you see how I can make him smaller in the scene. Okay, but like I said, I want to keep it up like this, so we have that. All right, so one thing that's going to really be important is that we don't want him to just start walking right away. Okay, what we're going to need to do is have a period of time where he's just kind of like hanging out and chilling and relaxing. All right, that way we can make sure the hair looks good, make sure the clothing looks good. He's in a more natural pose. Okay, so I want to create, that kind of setup before we even get started with the hair and fur and all that. So I'm going to set my start time here to -100, and that's just a random start time. And when I rewind it, we'll hit play, and you'll see that nothing happens until we get to 1 and he starts walking. Cool. Now when he gets to -100, I actually want to have a little bit of a leeway time for him to kind of relax and get into this walking here, because I want him to start not in this pose. I want him to start in what's called the T pose. So I'm going to go to my outliner. I'm going to hold down Shift and click this plus sign, and that grabs all of his joints. That opens up all of his joints. Okay, so I'm going to grab all of them like so. I'm going to reset his rotations to 0, and you'll see how that puts him in this position here. Okay, now he's also facing backwards. He was facing to the right, now he's facing to the left. If I grab this hip one and I rotate that around, let's say 180, now he's facing the correct direction. Okay, maybe he is, we'll find out. Alright, so I'm going to grab all these again, and I'm just going to set a rotational keyframe. So I'm going to right click, key selected, there we go. So now when I hit play, alright, so he's obviously spinning around the incorrect direction. So what I can do is go into my hips, go into my graph editor, which is under Window, Animation Editor's Graph Editor. And if I look at my keyframes here, you'll see, holy cow, it's a lot of keyframes. But this one, which is that rotate Y that we keyframed, we set to positive 180, probably should have been at negative 180. Okay, so I just grab that keyframe and then reset to negative 180 right here. And you'll see how it just transitions right into that same direction. So now when I rewind it and play, kind of gets in position and then just starts walking. Cool. Alright, so I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to grab all this again, go back to my graph editor, and I'm going to grab this keyframe and just set it to like negative 90. Negative. For now, I'm going to set it to negative 20. Okay? Because what this is going to do is just give me a little bit of leeway time where he's basically in this position here. And then, boom, he starts going. That might be too quick. Alright, negative 50, we'll cut the difference. Okay. There we go. Alright, so that looks pretty good. Okay. So, that's where I want him to start. So I'm going to save this as, or just save it again. So I did something I don't want to redo. There we go. Alright, so now before we get to the hair and fur and all that stuff, or the hair, what I need to do is isolate the hair. Because right now if I just said make hair, it's going to make it all over his entire body. And unless this is Robin Williams, we wouldn't want to do that. So what we want to do is isolate his head. So I'm going to duplicate the skin. So I'm going to click on the skin, which is this outer piece, and duplicate it. I then want to grab all of these. You'll see they're like this gray color. I'm going to grab them all and unlock them. And then I can isolate. There it is. And so now I just have him. It's just him by himself. Then I can go through to face mode and just start to delete stuff that I don't need. Okay? I'm not going to put any hair here. I'm not going to put any hair here. I'm not going to put any hair there. Okay, I'm going to kind of end my hair. I'll leave that. If you aren't positive of where you're going to need hair, it's always best to kind of leave the area, because once you get to the spot where you're adding hair and you're like, oh, I wish I had, you know, a little bit more room, you just don't have it at that point. You got to go back and undo and redo. Okay, so something like this. We're working on just actual like head hair, not like facial hair. So just going through and deleting stuff that I'm pretty sure I'm not going to need. So something like maybe like that. Okay, so I'm going to give you this skull cap, and I modified it from the original one because I wanted to not have a triangle on top. So just stuff to keep in mind when you do that. If I did use the one with the triangle, I may get some errors and it may crash and whatever else. So now that I have this skull cap, to get yours, you just import it and then you would have it in there. So I'm going to go to my XGen folder. I'm going to go to my create XGen description. And I'm going to say create a new description. And I'm going to give this a name. So I'm going to call this skull hair. skull hair collection. And I'm going to say this is a groomable spline. Okay, and then I hit create. And then if I look super duper close, you'll see that I have these little plus signs, locators, and if I go to wireframe, you can actually see that there's hairs inside there. Okay, now the hairs aren't showing up in here. They should be. I'm going to go to my legacy default. There we go. So under viewport, for whatever reason, they weren't showing up except in wireframe. But I go to my legacy, and then they show up. Okay, so now that I have those hairs, maybe because I had this on. Yeah, I had this use default material on, and it didn't like that. So there we go. So I'm just going to put this back to legacy just so I can see the hairs better. All right, so now we have these hairs. So I can go over here to my settings for this, and I can change the length of the hair. So if this is, you know, someone with longer hairstyle or a shorter hairstyle, you can really play with these settings here. I can also change the density. So if I needed more hairs, I could crank this up or pull it down. It's like one hair in the back. So, and this is where you're going to play with, you know, the style and the look of the hair. So obviously, the more hairs you have, the more you can do with it, but at a cost, right? It's always at a cost. So maybe I'll leave the density at 3, and that should be good for now. All right. So then what I can do is I'm going to go to the style, we're up in here, pose, there we go. And with pose, what we get is we get this little circle. Might be hard to see in the video, but there's a little circle right there. And as I click and drag, I'm basically moving these points around, moving the hairs around. So if I hold down B, make this bigger, and then I click and drag, it's a little bit more apparent at what's happening. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to style the hair. And this is something where you want to you know, be a little bit playing around with it at first, and then you can come back and adjust further as you go. Okay, don't try to get it perfect every swipe. And we can see now it's not even doing a single thing. There we go. It's taking a minute to update. My computer is kind of slow. There we go. I'm going to turn this back. It is on. Let's see. Alright, so I'm styling the hair basically. So whatever you want the hair to look like, that's what we're doing. Alright, so you may want to look at some reference for, you know, the way that hair moves. Because we can't just go, there we go, good, and call that a good hairstyle. Obviously it's not. Alright, I think the other scalp is kind of interfering with this a little bit. So I'm going to go to my move tool. I'm going to go to my outliner, and you'll see that I have my poly surface here. I can delete this mirror cut. And then I have my skin hair collection. So I'm going to grab both of these and go to my isolate. And now I can click on the sculpt, go to my pose, and maybe I won't get interference with my sculpting. Now, it appears that the default in this case is not going to work good, so I'm going to go to viewport, and the brightness of that head is just bothering me. I'm going to just assign it to the default Lambert. There we go. So I'm just going to keep sculpting this, kind of pulling it in. Now you will get, you know, there's, if you looked at any hair before, there's going to be a spot like in the back where all the hair kind of like radiates from. So you can see just naturally by me doing this, you can kind of see this like swirly Milky Way type pattern. And that's going to be just, you know, the way it is. Unless you have everything slick straight back, then you wouldn't get that. So I'm just kind of going through and styling the hair, you know, maybe it swoops to the side. You don't have to worry about getting every single hair because we will be smoothing out this transition. And make my brush a little bit bigger. Get all of these. I just want a majority of the hair to be in the correct direction. Because if a majority isn't, then when we smooth it, it's going to smooth the good stuff out of the way. Just a little bit of a cowlick back there, a little too much. Okay. All right. So that's looking pretty good. Now you see it's kind of bumpy. It's not really nice and smooth transitions. But if I go over here to the smooth, right there, spacing, length, orientation, okay. And then I just kind of go through and adjust. You can see how it's kind of transitioning the stuff a little bit smoother together to kind of blend it in. So we don't have, you know, one area of hair that's just crazy. And for some movies, they actually brought in like stylists who would help. You know, how do you style hair? And they would come in and do that. When they did clothing, they would actually bring in tailors, and the tailors would help them figure out how clothing's supposed to move. All right, so that's good. All right, so then we can change stuff like length. So if I go to length, we look at our length down here, 2.3574, and we start to change this. So let's say I set it to 1. Then it'll try to get this hair to a goal length of 1. Now for increment, I'm actually going down, so I put this to -0.1. And then as I painted the hair in the back, you can see how we're shrinking that hair. And again, we can go through and kind of smooth it out. So we don't have to worry about getting it perfect. You can see there's actually like a line of where the hair is. I'll lower this down further. There we go. Good. Then I'll go back to smooth. Kind of smooth out that transition. Okay, maybe I'll go back to length. Kind of give the side here a little bit. And then I believe we can also go to the eraser and just like completely erase some of the hairs. Or put a mask on it or whatever. So it's good. I'll go back to smooth. Smooth out this transition. Alright, so that looks pretty good. Alright, now we can keep playing with this and keep playing with this and keep playing with this. But for now, I'm liking the way it's looking. Adjust some of that. All right, cool. So now what we have is we have these splines that we've been grooming. Okay, that's all the stuff that we've been playing with. And if we come over here, we can say update preview automatically. Before I do, I'm going to save it. Yes. And I'm going to say update. And then what we're going to see is that I now have these like actual things on here. Okay, before it was just these yellow lines, and now I actually have something that resembles a hair system. Okay, so I can go back to my grooming and I can smooth things out and then say update again, and it'll update that stuff that I just did. You can see now we have like more of a swirl here than we did before. There's actually like a part 2. You can play with these settings and really tweak them. Okay, so this is giving you just a better preview of what's happening. Now for some reason I have no hairs on top of my head. There we go. I don't know why I just lost all the hair on top of my head. Alright, So now that I'm done with this, what I want to do is go to my preview as in outputs, and I'm going to go to the operation, and I'm going to say create guides. And it'll ask me, what percentage of the guides do you want? So if I don't need all of these, which you typically don't need all of those, you could change that. But for now, I'm just going to output 100, just so I have them and I can always use or not use some of them. So I'm going to say create. So it's going to go through and it's rendering the primitives into guides. These are the primitives. We'll get some guides. There we go. So now we have guides in here, and you're not going to be able to really see them too much. But now what I can do is, there's a useful part, is I can go to utilities and turn our guides into curves. Create. Come on. Grab that. Create. So now it's thinking. Alright, so now, after a few seconds, it's taken these guides and converted them into curves. Okay, so that whole process that we just did, styling the hair and shaping it, and then converting that into guides, and then taking our guides and converting that into curves, that whole process is so that we can get curves. Okay, and you'll see with this one that I just did, with my density set to, I believe, 3, that I actually outputted 2,305 curves. And if I isolate that, oops, there, you can see there's my curves. Alright, so now this could actually be used to create hair. Now it might sound like a crazy process, but that's the process. Okay, and if I don't like anything, like I'm like, oh, I'm not really set on these hairs here, maybe I can just delete those. It's not going to hurt anything. There we go. Okay. Let's unisolate, select that. There we go. All right. Now it looks like some of my guides are actually, or curves are actually like hidden inside here, but they're there. Which is hard to see them. So I'm going to take these and I'm just going to duplicate them. So I have a copy. And I'm just going to take all of this stuff that I have here, the poly surface, the skull hair collection, the XG grooming, and I'm just going to put it on a layer. Hair setup. There we go. And then I have this, which is my new hairstyle. Okay, and you'll see it looks pretty decent, right? Alright, so now what I want to do is I want to make this into actual hair inside Maya. So I'm going to grab this curve, like that. And again, I mean, I got 2,305 of these. I don't need 2,305 of these. That's probably, that is definitely overkill. So what we can do is just kind of go through and just grab random sections. Oops. You see how I'm just kind of like randomly going through. And what this will do is it'll just give you just an assortment of hairs. And because we're kind of doing it randomly, we should get a nice random selection of them. Okay. Now this is something that we need to play with. So what I want to do is I'm going to make all of these dynamic. We'll see how slow it goes, and then we can kind of hone it in from there. Okay. So I'm going to grab all these 2,305 curves. I should probably save. Let's go to, I don't know why I keep going there. I do, FX, there we go. So I'm going to go to nHair, and I want to take this, and I'm going to say I want to make the selected curves dynamic. So it's going to say output, and what I want to output is NURBS curves, and I'm going to make the curves dynamic. And so what this is going to do is duplicate these curves, make them dynamic, and then I'll have another set of curves that is moving. Alright, so 6 years later that actually finished doing its thing. Now if I go to wireframe, you'll see that we get a couple new things. We get this little dot in the middle. That's our hair system. We get a nucleus, and then we get these hair system output curves. Okay, and then we also get, if I scroll way up here, those one curves that we just had are now converted into follicles. and then there's our original curve. Okay, so if we look, there's actually like a lot of stuff going on. Now, if we hit play, nothing's going to really happen here. Okay, you see nothing really happens, nothing really happens. It's going obviously crazy slow, but it's not really doing much. And the reason it's not doing much is because our dynamic system is not really starting until it gets to frame 1. So I'm going to go to the nucleus and go to the attribute editor, and under the nucleus, way down here, under time attributes, I'm going to say start frame negative 100. Okay, that way it actually starts at negative 100. So when I rewind and hit play, we'll actually see the stuff moving. Okay, now again, it's going really slow because we have so many things happening. So this is like ridiculous. We can't work like this. Unless we're hourly, then we definitely could work like this. Come on. Alright, so what I want to do now is I'm going to go through my outliner, and here's my curves and here's my follicles. And I'm just going to reset this back to all objects on. I'm going to click on the first follicle, scroll all the way down to the bottom, shift click the last follicle, and then I'm just going to hold the control key and just deselect random follicles. Okay, so what this is doing is I'm going to turn some of these into active follicles, and then some of these are going to be passive follicles. And the active ones are going to be ones that are actually calculating dynamics, and the passive ones are just kind of like averaging out what the active ones are doing. So it should just speed up our scene a lot. Alright, so now that I have all of these selected, and then those other ones deselected, okay, no idea how many that is, just a lot. So I'm going to change our simulation method from dynamic to passive. Okay, so what that means is that when we hit play, you'll see how it's going to play back a bit quicker because now it's not simulating all of them. Okay, only the ones I deselected it's actually simulating. Alright, you'll also see that my guy has actually started moving, and I really don't want him to move right now. Okay, or actually I just want to focus in on the hair, so I'm going to scroll up. I'm going to grab all my hair stuff, and I'm just going to isolate it so I can just see the actual hair pieces. And my skull cap, I should probably bring that in here too. So if I go to show, isolate select, add selected object. Alright, so now we can take a look and see what this is doing. Okay, so we rewind it. You can see that it's definitely moving. It's slow, but it is definitely moving. Okay, so that's, you know, it's pretty much, that's the hair. It's on there. It's dynamic. Now we want to see what it's going to look like when it actually moves with our character. So if I go to my outliner again, and I grab my groom, which is this one with all the follicles in it, and if I go in here and I center pivot it, because my pivot's like way over there, and I move it, you'll see that nothing's going to happen. There's only one of these that's actually movable. So if I go to my output curves and I move that, well, you'll see we have output curves, and you know they definitely move, but the hair system itself is not dynamically moving. Okay, so I'm just going to undo that. I'm going to grab the hair system, try to move that. Alright, still nothing. Alright, now this is an important thing because you always have to go through and try to figure out what it is that you would be animating and moving around. Now if I go inside here, like I tried to move X groom and this was like not moving at all, but if I go to this XP curves from guide and I move that, you can see I can actually move that item. And when I hit play, you'll see that it's still moving and calculating all of this stuff. Okay. So why is that important? Well, we need to know what item we're going to take and parent to our geometry. So this XP curves, I'm just going to shift P to unparent it. This is our actual parent hair, we call it. Because I'm going to take this parent hair, I'm going to unisolate, I'm going to grab this joint. It might be hard to see because I have so much stuff in here. But there's a joint right there. Okay, I'm going to shift click that joint and I'm going to hit P to parent it to that joint. So what should happen now is that when we hit play, it stays there. But then once we hit 50, that's when our character starts moving. That he should actually start moving with it. Okay, and we actually did. You can see it's slowing down because he's actually moving with the character now. And then once the character starts going, you'll see that he's actually going to be like moving along. Okay, now I do have this hair setup still on. Let me turn that off. That's kind of confusing what we're seeing. And then we'll hit play again. And you can see how the hair is it's actually moving with the character now. So now it's dynamic. So now as he moves around, that hair is going to interact in a somewhat realistic fashion. Now it's not going to be perfect because we don't have any settings really set up on it. Okay, it's just kind of there it is. It's dynamic. So we want to adjust some of these settings. We want to see what it's looking like, all the above. So I'm going to go into the attribute editor for the hair system. And for whatever reason, my attribute editor seems to take forever when it opens up this one. So I'm just going to pause and wait. Okay, so it finally opened. So what I want to do is I want to grab one of these hairs. And when I grab one of the hairs, somewhere in this big list of things, I'll have a hair system shape. And you can access that through here too. If I go to the hair system, it'll pull that up also. Okay. So display quality, I can pull this down and we would see less stuff there. Clump and hair shape, and right now there's nothing attached to this, so this actually isn't doing anything. Okay, there's some stuff that it's doing, but right now we really can't see what it's doing. So what I want to do is I want to take this hair system and I want to add output curves, assign paint effects brush to hair. So I'm going to go here and assign paint effects brush to hair. Yes, make sure I have the right thing. And now what's going to happen is we actually have something that will render. Before, what would happen is that we would get nothing. Now when we render, we'll actually get something. I don't need this poly surface anymore. I'm just making sure I put this on. Yes, hair setup, good. And there it is. So now when I hit play, it's going to take a little bit longer because now we actually have something simulating, but there it is. We also have some hairs that seem to be below the surface. Okay, so I could always go back to my original hair. Now because we parented it, it's going to be inside here. So if I go inside of this way far down, eventually I'll find it. Okay. It's inside neck, and here's my parent hair, and I could scale this up slightly and then I would actually get those pieces of hair popping out. Okay, the closer my original shape was to the actual head, the better that's going to turn out. Okay, so I can adjust it like that, and now I'll have a full head of hair. Okay, now if there's a seam or something, I could individually go through and grab some of the hairs like so, and start to pull them closer to the head. But for now, I think it's going to be good. All right, cool. All right, so now the paint effects thing that we just assigned, what it does is it gives us something that can render. So I'm going to go to my attribute editor for my hair system. Now we have this paint effects button on here. And so now this display quality will actually do something. We still can't see anything really happening, but it's doing something. So I'm going to pull this hairs per clump up. And what's happening is there's an actual hair from our legacy. Sometimes, like I said, the legacy or the viewport, some will display differently. I'm adding more clumps or more hairs per clump, but my clump width is super tiny. So as I pull this clump width up, you'll see that I actually get, some hairs in my scene. That's why it's not terribly important that this hair lands flush right on the edge, because as we add more hairs to this and change that clump width, it'll change the thickness of that area. All right. So now this hair would actually render. So I'm going to go to show and just turn curves off for now, just so I can see the hair and take a look and see what this is doing. Okay. Now obviously it looks, there's no widow's peak or there's no fanciness to the hair. There's just kind of like a hairstyle. But it is what it is. Right now that's where we're at. So we could always, once we know the process and know what we're doing with it, we can always go back and start to tweak stuff and do the process again to get desired results. For your first time, it's going to be a lot more difficult to understand everything at once. So, going through the process a couple times would definitely help. So, adding more hairs to the clump, you see how I get more hair. If we look here, it's an easy spot to see it, you'll see that we have this clump width. Okay, so it's just making that thicker, right? We also have this thinning. So if you look at the lengths of each one of these, that might be easier to see. They're all pretty much straight. It just like chops off right here. So if I take my thinning, you'll see how now it's going to kind of variate, if that's a word, the lengths. I could also twist the clumps if I needed to twist them. I can change my bend following so that all the hairs aren't followed the exact same way. The hair width, this isn't going to show here, but when it renders, it'll show how wide each hair is. Here's that display quality. So now as I pull this down, now we can actually see something happening. So this is something you can change like later on. So sometimes you'll work like this just to kind of get an idea of what the hair is moving like. And then when we render it, it'll render at full-blown 100%. All right. If your station's going really slow, you may want to crank this down even further. Then we have these things, and these are all ramps controlling individual properties. So here's clump width, right? So we have this width of how wide each clump is, but then we have this width scale, and that's what's causing it to kind of taper, so that the width at the bottom is thicker, and then it kind of tapers into this. That's where this is coming from. So I pull this up, it's going to be perfectly straight for the entire clump. If I pull it down, we'll end up getting like points. So again, something you can play with. You may have noticed also that my hairs are kind of jagged. If we go to this angle here, you can really see it on this one where it's just flat. So I can take these subsegments up, and that will smooth out the hair. So nice smooth hair. I also have the hair width scale, and again, hair width, we're not seeing any difference. That's a render thing. So if I play with this all day long, it's not going to do anything until we actually go to render. Then there's clump curl. So I could take this and actually like make the hair kind of curly, so it's not perfectly straight. Right in the front, we can really see that. Okay, so at 0 or 0.5, it just goes like this. And then if we go to 1, it's going to curl one way. If we go to 0, it curls the other way. So sometimes a little bit of curl is kind of good in there because it meshes the hairs together. We also have clump flatness, which is pretty much down to 0. As I pull this up, it'll just start to flatten out the clumps. Okay, so instead of them being like a round circle, they're just going to be flat in some areas. And again, it's nice to have some variation inside here. And let's see, what else do we have? Dynamic properties. This is how the hairs are going to interact in the scene. So now that we have something we can actually see, we can rewind this. And then I want to do a play blast because I want to see what this is going to look like, in the scene. So I'm going to save it. Yes. And I'm going to right click and go to Play Blast option box. I'm going to set this to Image, Maya, from window 100%. And I'm going to Play Blast. I'm going to let it just do its thing, and then I can look at this and see how the hair is moving, and then we can tweak it from there. Alright, now one thing you're going to notice is that he just walked right off a frame. So I'm going to hit escape and take a look and see. So right here the hair looks fine. And as we start to move, we can see it's kind of like jittery a little bit. Okay, what we want to do is kind of follow him so that we can see what the animation is doing the entire time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewind this again. I'm going to make a new camera. And I'm going to call this one the walk cam. Because I want to follow him as he's walking. Okay. Now I could, let me zoom way out. I could go through and set a keyframe here, go to the end, set a keyframe there. But what I want to do is not that. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on, using the outliner, I'm going to click on this joint here. Actually, not that joint. I'm going to click on the waist. Okay. Right there is good. Nope, I'm going to hit up one more time. There we go. So I want this hips one, because the hips is where the actual movement forward happens. Okay. And then I'm going to just kind of position my camera so I can see the hair. So I have the hips selected. I'm going to control click my walk cam, and then under the hotbox, under constrain, I'm going to say point option box. And I'm going to constrain just the Z direction because that's the direction he's walking. So now, oops, let me hit undo. Go back to constrain, go back to point. Z, I need to make sure I hit maintain offset. There we go. I thought that was already clicked, but it wasn't. So now what would happen is as we hit play, let me hit escape for a second. Let me close this. As we hit play and the character is actually moving, our camera is going to stay following him. That's what we want. Okay. So now we're rewinding it to the beginning. The hair went crazy because I was clicking. I'm going to save our scene. Yes. I'm going to right click. I'm going to play blast option box. And I'm going to let it go again. And now I'll be able to watch it all the way to the end. Alright, so here's our sampling. And it is going to be a bit difficult to, fully see what's going on with this. So sometimes you'll actually need to render out little clips and see what's going on with the little clips. Or find a section that has longer hair or whatever to kind of play with that. Okay. Now just to kind of go through, right click. Go through some of the settings. I'm going to pop the attribute editor. Oh, Maya's going to crash. Alright, so now what I want to do before we get too far away from this is I'm going to go to a new scene, and I'm just going to create a simplified version of what we have. Okay, so I'm going to take a sphere, I'm going to go to my nHair, and I'm going to create hair. Now what we did was we made curves first. Okay, so now we have curves on there, and then we attach paint effects to it. Okay, so this would actually be done individually inside of this, but you can also create it like that all together at once. Okay, so I'm going into this scene just so it's a little bit simpler, a little bit quicker, and a little bit more obvious as to what's happening inside of our scene now. So essentially this is what the hair is doing in our scene. Now because we're working at such a big scale, like that, these hair movements are pretty small. You can see that they're barely moving. Now if we go into our hair system, and we take our clump width up, we take our hairs per clump up. All right, you'll see that it's still pretty tiny. Now in the other system, we actually have like a lot more hairs, so it's a bit more obvious as to what's happening. All the dynamic stuff is going to be the same regardless of what size we're at. So I'm gonna just leave this low, and here's the clump. I'm just gonna make this a bit bigger. All right. So all this is going to still be doing the same thing at the small size as it does at the big size. It's just at the bigger size, it's going to happen, you know, a little bit more subtly than at the smaller one. Okay. And then also because of the length of the hair, we're going to be getting some different reactions as well. Now, one of the sucky things about the hair tool is that there's no like hair length tool, like hair length properties inside here. The only way to change the length of the hair is to go into the nHair and then go to scale hair tool. There it is. And then we can just click and drag with the, come on, nHair, scale hair tool. Oh, I had to rewind it to the beginning first. And then I can middle click and drag, and then I can scale the hair up or down. Okay, so if we're not getting the desired results, you know, scaling it could obviously help kind of match those original curves a bit better and match the original length of the hair a bit better too, if we needed to. We actually sometimes go a little bit beyond, and you'll get some neat results as well. So, like we talked about, here's the hairs per clump. So this is how many hairs are in each individual clump. Here's the clump width. And then we can control the width using this too. Okay. Any of these graphs, you have this as the start point of it, and then this as the end point of it. Okay. And then this is kind of just like overall what it's doing. We also have thinning. We also have the twist, bend follow, and this is going to control how it's following that bending after it's dynamic. You can see right here it's kind of flattened out a bit, whereas this, it kind of maintains its clump width. Okay, so again, you kind of play with all these settings until you're happy with them, and a lot of times it's going to be you have to render it out to actually see the results. All right, here's hair width scale. Now, like I said before, it's not going to happen until we render it. So now that I can render this, and I'm going to take my options back to render settings here. Okay, so this is actually the hair width. So you can see that the hair itself stays one pretty consistent length until it gets to the end, and then kind of comes to a point. And that's what this is going to control. So if I wanted to, you know, pull this like this and pull it like that, it would just basically come from a one width and just straighten out. So this setting is actually pretty decent where you don't need to play with it too much. Now I may need to play with the hair width to get some better results. Okay, this one obviously if we're going with something cartoonier, that's where we can play with this hair width to get something that's a little bit more cartoony looking. Now even though this goes up to only 0.1, we could type in 1 and get something that's obviously ridiculous looking, but again, depending on what you're doing, that may be exactly what you're looking for. Okay, so and again, this is going to be based on scale what that value is going to be. 0.05 here looks pretty thick, but when it's scaled up, 0.05 might be perfect. Okay, we also have clump curl, which we talked about, curling the hairs a little bit just to kind of break up the straightness of it. Clump flatness, if we want to flatten the clumps out or not. And then here's where we're getting really play. So we have collisions, so we can tell the hairs to collide with each other. All right, so if this hair comes down and hits that hair, it'll actually register and not collide with it. So you can see how they're sitting on top of each other now. If this is off, the hairs will actually go through each other. Okay, so again, stuff to play with to get a more realistic look. If you do this too much, and your clumps are too thick, you may actually get some really weird results, okay? Because you can see it's actually clumps colliding with clumps. It's not hairs colliding with hairs. All right, so just pay attention to, you know, to that setting. We also have solver display, so we can actually set the collision thickness, so we can see how thick it's colliding. And then here's the self-collision thickness. This is how thick individual pieces are colliding, and we can adjust these properties if we wanted them to kind of intermingle a little bit more. If we wanted a little bit more overlap. Turn it off. We also have bounce, we have friction, we have stickiness. So now we can turn on the sticky attributes. Maybe turn the bounce up and the friction and stickiness down. So it's bouncier than it was a minute ago. Pull these up, pull it down. And again, we can pull different numbers in here. So this is 43 now, so this is going to be really sticky. Okay. Now some of these are actually going to only stick to certain properties. So if I go to a sphere or a plane or whatever, and I want this to collide with that, I just have to go under my nHair and say make collide. Make collide. Why do you always move? And cloth. Passive collider. There we go. So now, there it is. Okay, so nCloth, passive collider, and now these are getting stuck to that. So if I grab the hair system again, take the stickiness off, friction off, bounciness up, you can see how it's now jittery on the surface and not just like sticking to that surface. Okay. So again, stuff you got to play with in order to get the right results of what you're trying to accomplish. Static cling I haven't played with. Let me see what that does. It just kind of frizzes it a little bit. I'm sure it's doing more than just frizzing it a little bit, but it's actually acting kind of weird. So let's take the friction up to maybe 0.5, maybe 1. There we go. So that's looking good. Under dynamic properties, we have the stretch resistance and the compression resistance. So 10 and 10 should be pretty good, just so you can see what the stretch resistance is going to do. Zoom out so you can see it. With no stretch resistance, our hair will actually stretch out. Okay, not typically something you'd want to happen, but depending on what you wanted to do with your hair, you may want a little bit of stretch to it. Okay, this could actually be used for other things besides hair. If you know your hair is perfectly stiff as far as the length goes, then set it up to something higher. And then compression resistance is its ability to kind of compress on itself. So with no compression resistance, it just kind of like falls right into itself. With a lot of compression resistance, it's not going to just compress into itself. It's a subtle change. I'll leave that at 10. I'll leave this at 10. Bend resistance, let's put that up to 20. Watch what happens here. Okay, so now my hair is going to be a little bit stiffer in what it's doing. Okay, and again, I could crank that up, 50. So now there's no bend resistance at all. So they used a lot of hairspray. Not an incredible amount, but enough to give you some bounce into your hair. Okay, so some hairstyles, you actually do have that ability to bounce the hair instead of it falling in on itself, which is what this is doing. So I guess that would be comparable to like volume, good volume for your hair. And then twist resistance, the ability to resist twisting, that should be fine. And then rest length scale, we can actually control how long it's going to be when it comes to rest. So it kind of like exaggerates the length of it for a second. Now this isn't meant to be like an animated thing. You could obviously animate it. But sometimes you want the hair to kind of be a little bit longer than it is without using the scale tool. So you could do something like that, or a little bit shorter. There we go. Okay, so this is kind of like the way to change the length of it when it comes to rest. Oops, don't rewind it. There we go. And then we have stiffness scale. So just like some of these compression and whatever else, here's a stiffness scale. So as I hit play, you'll see that the very tip of this is very stiff, and then the very end of this is not very stiff. So if I take the stiffness scale down, what's going to happen is the whole thing is going to be very floppy. Okay? And if I take it all the way down, there's no stiffness at all in this thing, and it'll just like fall over. Alright, so it's very little stiffness in it. I do have some bend resistance still in there, so I can turn that off too, so we can really see this. There we go. So now it just looks like things hanging from those spots. Now you'll notice too that it's not colliding with this sphere. So if I go in here and just make that a N-cloth passive collider, hit play, now it's going to actually collide with that sphere and not go through it. Okay, so just stuff to kind of pay attention to as you're doing it. If you don't notice it, sometimes you don't need to worry about it, but sometimes you do. Fine, I trust this network. All right, so there's that. So now we also have stuff like mass. Oh, I skipped a bunch. Let's pull this back up to where that was. Let's pull this down to here. We have attraction scale and then start curve attract. Let me put my mass back to 1. The start curve attract is there's a curve that's in here that's the start curve, which is where it's at right now. If I say I want you to be attracted to that start curve and then hit play, you'll see how when I hit play it's just staying right there. Now let me add a little bit of animation to the ball just so we can see it kind of move around. So I'm just going to go here, go there, and then I'll bring it back down to here. All right, so now so you can see that we do get some movement. It's kind of like a bounce, but what's happening is it's trying to maintain that original start curve. So if I styled my hair, it'll bounce around, it'll wiggle, it'll do some stuff, but eventually it'll get back to where I wanted that original hair at. Okay, or where the original hair was created. Now sometimes this can be a bit too much, and so we kind of play that game of we want to have some nice movement in the hair, but not have it go crazy. Okay, so we play with that. Then there's also this damping. Anytime you see damping, that just means like it coming to rest. How smooth is it going to come to rest? And sometimes these things will bounce around forever. Now, pulling the damping up too much may look funny as well. So just, again, be aware of that. Now, here's the attraction scale. So here's my start curve attract. Here's a scale. So the very start of this, try to get right there, or try to get right there. The very end of it, not so much. I pull this all the way up, and you'll see that it's going to be a lot stiffer overall. Okay, where here we're kind of changing this based on where the end of the curve is. Like the end of the hair is not going to be very attracted, but the start of it definitely is. Okay, and then we could smooth this out too. You can see how, well, I'm not going to show it. Smooth is smooths out that transition, so it's not just like a linear type thing. Let's see, forces. So here's our mass. So we can crank the mass up, and now the hair is going to be a bit heavier. So again, it's going to interact a bit different because the mass of the hair is so much heavier. Okay, and then we have drag, which is kind of like its resistance to movement. Usually crank drag up a bit. Yeah, with those settings at that, we're not really seeing anything. Let's turn that off. Should be good. A little bit of bend resistance in there. Alright, so there's our drag. So let's turn it off and see if we get anything different. Yeah, not terribly too much. In this specific scene, we're not seeing, you know, a huge difference in changing this drag. But again, sometimes you want to play with that, especially when the hair is coming to rest. That's usually when you'll see a lot of these come into play. So it comes up here and it hits, and then it comes back down. Let me add some more frames here. And it does its thing here, and you can see that the hairs are actually like continuously wiggling. So this is where stuff like drag and damping we can really crank up a bit. And what it should do is just come to rest a lot sooner. So if I wind it and play, oh, there we go, look at that. Very little movement there, and then it comes down. And it's kind of coming to rest very slowly. Okay, again, something you play with. The damping's up way too high in this one. So damping at like 0.1 is usually like a good value. There we go. That looks nice and subtle. Okay. Ignoring gravity. If you ignore gravity, then all the stuff where it falls down is going to be just like go away. We can add some turbulence. And what the turbulence is going to do is not necessarily like make the hair go crazy. It would, but it just kind of helps break it up a little bit. Because what happens is you get these patterns, perfect patterns. And by adding a little bit of turbulence and then just kind of like cutting it off, you'll see that you have the effect of it where it's, you know, made it a bit random, but then it just kind of like settles in. Okay. Alright, so then we also have shading in here, and this is where we can control things like what color's the hair. It's green, it's yellow, it's red. Okay, and this is kind of like an overall. So you can see as I adjust the color, there are some little different flecks of coloration in the hair. And as we render this, you can see that even though I picked that brown color right here, we still have some whites and blondes inside it. And that's going to come from this hair color scale. So as I take this, I start to pull these values, you'll see how I'm kind of darkening some of these areas because I'm taking this, the coloration of this and kind of like masking it off. Okay, I can also have the specular color, which I could give a little tint to. And that'll help adjust some of the coloration on it as well, instead of it being just that white color. There's also opacity, so if I want the hair to be a bit opaque or a bit transparent, then I can make the hair a bit transparent, and that gives it a little bit more realistic look if we have lots of hair. There we go. Translucence, which is not anything we need to play with. Cast shadows is important, obviously, because we want some shadow casting. And then this is a cool one too. We have color randomization. So right now we're getting some random colors in the diffuse and the specular, but I could also randomize the hue. So if I pull this up a lot, you'll really see it. I lied. Let me take the opacity back up to 100 so we can see it fully. And let's take this hue randomization up just ridiculous, 333. And it's not doing a thing. Why aren't you doing a thing? There we go. Probably because my saturation and value weren't randomized also. There you go. So now I'm getting like a streak of green and a streak of blonde and a streak of red. Because I'm varying, I'm randomizing each one of these things. So again, this is stuff that you can add just like a little bit to, and it goes a long way because no one's hair is perfectly the same color all over. So you can see how we can get a little bit of coloration here and here and here, and they all look, you know, very similar, but also we're getting a nice blend of different colorations inside there. And usually the hue one, I pull it down a bit further because I don't want to get any purple hairs. There we go. Or green. I'm getting a green hair in here too. Take the saturation down to 0.1 and the value down to point. We'll turn all these to 0.2. There we go. So now we have some nice colorations inside there. Cool. Multi-streaks. So we can actually add some streaking into the hair. Look at that. Which kind of fills it in a bit more. Light each hair. Change the spreads on these. Okay, so again, another way to kind of fill in some of those gaps. Get back to 1. We're back here. Okay. I typically don't use multi-streak too often. I'd rather just have the actual hairs there. Other things to pay attention to: visible in reflections, visible in refractions. So if you have a reflection, your object actually won't be reflective unless you have it reflecting. You can borrow this plane, and we'll put a Mia on it. And I'll make it chrome. And make sure rendering with mental ray, and then with the render button. And I'll add a light in the scene because there's no lights in the scene. It's quadratic. Mental ray, light shape. So that's 1. Set this to visible. Close that. Alright, still kind of dark. Let's add another 1 in here. Alright. Now we can see that the hair is definitely not in there, but we are getting like the shadows from the hair in there, which is obviously odd looking. I'm going to duplicate this light and just pull it to the back. And over here, just so we can get a little bit more light into the scene. There we go. So the hair looks actually pretty decent. I haven't really played with a whole lot of the settings on it. I've just kind of, tweaked a couple here and there. So it doesn't look like horrible in this case, right? But what I do need to do is go through that hair system and turn on visible in reflections and refractions if I have those items. So now when I render this, I should see those reflections and in the reflection. And there it is. Okay. So if you didn't know that button was there, obviously it would freak you out because you have a bald guy walking in front of a mirror instead of, this stuff. It works really good with vampires. You can turn vampires so they're not visible in reflections, and it works perfect. Maybe that's what happened, why they aren't visible in reflections. Someone just forgot to click a button when they created them. Alright, so that's all this stuff. Now this is globally what's happening to this. So I can close all my windows. There we go. So globally, this is all the stuff that we can adjust on these specific items. Now I could also go into that specific follicle. So if I grab one of these curves, it grabbed the follicle, and I could go into that follicle and I could change things like the degree of that curve. So now it's a 3-degree curve, where before it may have been a 1-degree curve. And then it looks pretty blocky. So now it's a 3-degree curve, which looks smoother. Okay. I could also take this and make it a braid, which is going to be difficult to see. Let me rewind. You'll see it better. But what the braid does is it actually like braids the hair. So like wraps the clump in this braiding format, which is pretty neat. And here's the cool stuff: is I can override dynamics. So all the stuff that we played with on the other one globally, I can adjust individually on this one. So I can turn his stiffness up or down. I can turn his stiffness scale up or down. I can change his clump width scale up or down. I can go down here to his clump width multiplier and make it thicker. Okay, make his density thicker or less. His curl multiplier. His curl twist offset. Okay, his color blend, which means I'm blending this color kind of into it with that red. What we should get is a really crazy looking hair, I guess. Obviously different than the other ones. So I think I still have the braid button clicked. Alright, to crank this color blend up more, so that's at 5. So now it actually sees some of that color blend coming in, but you can see how it's braided in here too, which is, again, kind of neat that we can grab different items and adjust those kinds of things. There's that color blend. Cool. Alright, fun stuff. Turn that back to 0. Turn this override dynamics off. Don't have it braid. And then pull this in. Now these are different ones than this, so I have to basically reset all of these back to where it was. Okay, there we go. Okay, so there it is. Now our hair, if we hit play, you'll see that he just starts moving. Now we may not want him to just start moving right away like our guy does. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, let's say I wanted the hair to kind of start at that point. So I'm going to grab the sphere, rewind it, and I'm just going to grab these keyframes and mute the selected items. So now when we hit play, he just like hangs out. So what I want to do is kind of let the hair come to rest, like that, and then I want to tell my hair this is where I want you to start. Okay, now under the nCache, initial state, solver's initial state, set for selected, will not work on this kind of thing, okay? Because this is nHair, and nHair has its own way that it works. So what I need to do is I need to grab all my curves here. So I just click on one and then hit the up arrow. And then under my nHair, I say set start position from current. So what that means is that when I rewind it, my hair stays here, and then when I hit play, you can see that there it is. Okay, so now I have just my hair just kind of resting right there. All right, so these ones definitely have different positions or different settings than the other ones would. Okay, so you just have to be aware that kind of nHair is in the N system where it uses a nucleus, but it does have some different stuff here. We could also paint things like baldness and hair color and specular color on top of this. If we had another item, so I make another sphere, I could actually take this sphere and say assign that hair system to this one. Oops, let me create hair first. Sure. And you'll see that they both have that same hair system. But if I had more than one hair system, I could assign different hairs to different systems. All right. Making curves dynamic. I can display my start position curves. I can display my rest position. I can display other stuff. I can set my rest position from my current ones too. So just be aware of that as well. I can randomize the follicles. Make sure I grab the follicles. I always grab the wrong thing. Come on. Turn this off. I'm going to right click and go to follicles. There we go. And then randomize follicles. And then when I rewind it, you'll see that the follicles are now in a random position, not in that pattern type position. Okay? And in this case, when I made my nHair originally, I could have said randomize and turn that up. We could also paint follicles. So if I realized I needed more detail here, I could add more there, or take some out here, or whatever. Okay. So just be aware that we have like lots of different options to play with nHair to get it to do what we want it to do. Now let me go back to my outliner and grab my hair system. And oops, I want to grab the sphere first. I'm going to unmute these so my hair moves. Unmute selected. And I'm going to grab my hair system and just do a nCache. Alright, so now it's going to go through and actually cache out that hair and its movements so that we will have something that is locked in. Okay, now the same stuff that I did on this one, you'll be looking at that on your other one as well. So there's my hair locked into place. Perfect. Okay, so let me go jump back to this one. And just call it hairball. And these are fun ways just to kind of see in a more live fashion of what's happening. When we go to our full scene, it goes so slow, it's like, oh geez, come on. All right, so the same stuff that we did on the other one, we want to obviously play in this one. I'm gonna jump back to my perspective view. I'm gonna look at the hair, and I'm gonna say, you know, whether or not I like what I'm seeing. But what I can do is just go into that hair system shape. Let's go to my clumps. Maybe I'll make my clump width just a tad bit bigger. There we go. And if I hit this hair system select, you'll see how it still keeps me here, but I can see what's going on there. Okay, so I like that. There's also this baldness map, so we could actually go through and paint, just like we were talking about before. Painting baldness map, paint hair textures, baldness, and that's where that would attach. I'm going to pull my thinning up a little bit. Let's see, under shading, darken the hair a little bit. I also like to go to the specular color and just give this a little bit of a tint. So if I pick this color, I'll just kind of lighten it slightly like that. Cast shadows for sure. A little bit of hue randomization in here. Okay, and again, you can kind of see what's happening there from this point of view. It might be difficult to see, but it's there. Let's see, render stats, so visible in reflections, I want that on. I'm not going to have any glass, but I guess I can turn that on too, just in case. Let's see, turbulence, like I said, maybe just a tiny bit of turbulence just to kind of mix things up a little bit. Twist resistance, everything's good there. My stiffness scale, I'm going to pull this down a touch. My start curve attract, I'm going to pull that up to like 0.35 or so, and then do a little damping on it. Okay, then under my forces, I like to have, you know, your dynamic stuff, you typically want to have some damping on there. Alright, and for his attraction scale, I'm going to pull this up some. He has shorter hair, so it's not going to be as long. Long hair obviously is going to interact differently than short hair would. Okay, collisions, self-collide. Now this could be a dangerous one because the hairs don't have, they're already kind of like touching each other. So when I hit play, they may just freak out. Well, they're actually doing a good job. Okay, good job, guys. Let's look at that and see. Solver collision thickness. And you can see that they are kind of colliding with each other in certain areas. And what's going to happen is that they're gradually just going to kind of push each other apart if they can. I'll probably take this self-collision thickness down a touch. 0.5, that should be good. And let's say clump curve. Alright, that should be good. Alright, so now let me save this. Yes. And I'm going to add a light into my scene. Create lights, area light. And this is going to be our scene we're going to use for the cloth also. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of set this up over here. And same kind of settings, you know, quadratic. Now because my scene is huge, this number is going to have to be huge. Alright, so there's that. Let's do a little render just to see if we're getting any light. Maya's going to crash. Wonderful. Alright, so Maya crashed on me a couple times, and what I had to do was just import my scene. So I just went to import, imported my scene, rebuilt my light, and then it was happy for whatever reason. So this is where I'm at with my hair. Okay, and you'll see that the guy is very reflective, and you may have seen him kind of glowing before. He actually has, if I go to my hypershade, he actually has this like really weird shader on him. And it's not even going to show up inside here, which is obviously really weird. But if I go into graph, material, and selected objects, nope, sometimes that works. If I click on the double arrows, there we go. So here's his material, and you can see it says template Fong. So I'm just going to grab this Fong here and just delete the Fong. Now that takes his material off, and then I can assign a different material to him. So I can assign a Mia to him. And obviously I don't want him reflective, so I can just turn all that off and just kind of give him a flat color. The important thing in this one is the hair. That's what we're kind of focusing on. So I just try to keep him as neutral as I can, just kind of enhance the scene and not detract from, you know, what's going on. Now, if you try to just assign a Fong or a Mia to him, it wouldn't work. I don't know why it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And I can hit 3 on him also just to kind of smooth him out. Save my scene. Do a test rendering, and then I can see, okay, well the hair, obviously maybe I have too much hair because now it's looking like chunky. So then I can go through and you see I have this name, Sarcona underscore startup underscore dynamics underscore dress up hair system. Let me go to my general editor's namespace editor. And here's where it's going to do that Sarcona blah 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 blah. So I'm going to say delete, merge with root. And now it's like some weird name. Alright, let's close that and reopen it. There we go. So now it just says namespace. So that time I clicked delete, merge with parent. Usually merge with root works. That's what I should have done. Whatever. Alright. If yours didn't crash and you never import, then you don't have to worry about it. So let me take my hair clumps down, so maybe to 10. I do have a lot of hairs in here, so obviously the more hairs I have, the less clumping I need. I can take my clump width up slightly, maybe even take this down to 8 or to 7. My hair width, I'll set to 0.01. And I like to save it, especially now that I've introduced crashing into the mix, before I do any rendering. And now you can see how I'm starting to get some results that are looking more like actual hair. Now again, this is going to be like perm kind of hair. It's not fully styled because we never styled anything like it. We just kind of like left it in, and there it is. Okay, so So there is our hair. Now we could also go under the nHair. No, that's good. All right. Let me see what I was looking at here. Yeah, maybe even just like go into that hair system and go down to our clump with scale. And pull it down a little bit more. I'll put a little turbulence on here. Okay, now we're not going to get any of that until we actually play it and simulate it, but there it is. Okay, so again, you just kind of go through and you play it and you adjust it and you tweak some of your settings, and then I'm going to render it out. Okay, so I don't want to cache it at this point because I'm still tweaking settings. I'm still looking at this to see what I want this rendering or the hair to look like. So I'm going to go into my walk cam. And I'm going to zoom in pretty close to the hair like that. Then I'm going to select my camera, go in the attribute editor. There it is. I have this point constraint on it, and what I want to do is update that, because if I go back, if I went back to the beginning, it's just going to reset this. So what I want to do is update this thing. There used to be a button in here where we could just click it and it would update, but it doesn't want to do that apparently. So what I'm going to do is just delete that offset and then reset this up, because I want to be close to the hair because we're going to render it out a little bit smaller. There's my resolution gate. Bring this in closer. There we go. And then I'm going to go to my hips here. Where are my hips? Right there. So I'm going to grab the hips. I'm going to control click my walk cam. And I'm going to do that constrain again. Constrain point option box. Just in the Z direction. Maintain my offset. And there we go. Okay. Now this is set to, this time I should actually be set to -100. That's where we had our stuff originally. So that when we hit play, it'll gradually come to rest and it'll be fine. Okay. So what I would do is inside here, when we do our name.number, my start frame is -100. And my end frame would be, let's say 30. That should give us plenty of time just to kind of test it out and see. So when we render it, you'll see that our start frame is actually going to be -100. I don't want that. I'm going to say renumber my frames starting at 1 and go by 1. Okay, so 1 to 131, perfect. Do my walk cam, good. You can lower this too, depending on how long your renderings take. You may want to lower this resolution. I would rather keep this a little bit higher and just take this quality down if you can. So 0.125 or something. Okay, so that should be good. All right, so then what we do is just go through and we would just render this out. Just batch render it, check it out and see what the hair is doing, come back and tweak some settings and then see what it's doing again. Okay. Now, in most cases, because of the size, not most cases, but in this specific case, our scene should be big enough, our hair should be, a good size and proportion correctly, so that we don't have any like craziness happening where they're going in through it too much or bouncing around too much. Okay. So now it's just a matter of playing with those settings, rendering it out, playing with the settings, rendering it out, playing with the settings. If you can get by with the play blast and still see your stuff, then perfect. But sometimes it's very difficult to see it because of all the other stuff that's going on. Now we could also turn off some of these things, like I could turn off hair systems. follicles, paint effects, which is under locators. Strokes, there we go. Turn off strokes, and then I would see those curves, and then again I could do a play blast of this and get an idea of what the curves are actually doing. Now there are two sets of curves here also. Let me jump back to my perspective view. Okay, so you can see that there's this curve here, and what that's showing is that's my like start curve. Okay, the little purple one underneath is actually the dynamic curve that's moving. So if I grab this and hit the up arrow, and then I'm just going to throw this on a layer. There we go. Okay, so now that's off the layer. So now all I'm looking at is the stuff that's actually moving. Again, you can kind of look at it and see, but it's very difficult to see the movement of it. Okay, it's very subtle in what it's doing, and that's kind of like what it's meant to be doing, is just very subtle movement. A lot of this, you know, just it's playing a game. There's no specific rules. There's no specific way to hammer it out. It's just kind of like render it out and see what happens. Okay, so for this one, it might take a couple renderings to get there, or it might take a couple play blasts. You definitely want to play blast it first, because if you play blast it and you see something's wrong, then that's definitely going to translate. Let's take this. That's going to translate into the rest of your scene. But if you're not seeing anything wrong, then render it out and see if there's anything kind of coming up crazy, and then you can tweak from there. Okay, now we're not concerned really with the first 100 frames, we're concerned with once he starts moving. Right? So that's how we do hair, and then we can turn our stuff back on. We can, you know, render it out to a nicer quality once we're satisfied with, you know, what it's looking like. When we do our cache, we only need to render it from 1 to 100 and whatever the animation is. I believe it goes to, yeah, like 240 or something. Yeah, you don't need to render the whole thing, just like 240 would be sufficient. Okay, just a nice sampling of this animation kind of walking across. All right, so there we go. There's hair and fur.